Hi, everybody. I had this all ready to go and forgot to post it, so here we go. I'm going to walk you through my project, which is called Cultivating Student Activism Through Contemporary Critical Literacy for now. It's a microethnographic narrative research study. So the purpose of the study was to explore ways that kids make connections as they're talking with their groups to position themselves as activists. And these are the two books that we read: Jacqueline Woodson's Hush and All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley. Both books deal with the intersection of kids of color and police brutality. So we crafted this research to show the intellectual promise and amazing connections that teenagers can make. The kids worked together over 6 Saturdays last summer, and we engaged them with critical reading around social justice issues in conjunction with the idea of building towards community action. So the reading and the discussion built toward action. So my research questions were: in what ways, if any, do adolescents in a social justice book club use critical young adult literature paired with peer discussion to position themselves as activists in their communities? And then what ways, if any, do they make connections between the literature and the action or civic engagement? So this is a lot of text for you, but this basically tells about the book club and the text. So if you haven't read these, I would highly recommend them, especially All American Boys. It's the story of two boys, one black, one white, and the white boy observes the black boy getting beaten by a cop. So as a bystander, he also, we hear the story, or we learn about the story through both perspectives with alternating chapters. And it's just published in 2016. It's an awesome book. And the other book is Hush, and the main character is a teenage girl. And that story revolves around her father, who is a police officer and the only police officer of color on his police force, and he sees white officers beating an African American young man. And he eventually turns state's evidence, which means that the whole family had to go into hiding. And so it's told from the female perspective and also from the perspective of what it's like to be a police family. So anyway, we did a lot of work with the kids. I was the participant observer. My friend and colleague, Tiffany Nietzsche, did all the facilitating, and the workshops included video, reflective writing, poetry, and a lot of discussion and artwork at the end. So at the end of the workshop, after the kids had produced this inspired artwork, they shared their group plans with community members who came to the library where we met. And the plans were ways to make their community better. So the frameworks, the theoretical frameworks I'm dealing with here are positioning theory, and Dr. McVie is an expert in that. And also critical discourse analysis using critical race theory. And when I was at the Literacy Research Association conference, I was definitely advised that when dealing with social justice issues and kids of color, I should always look to theories that address the participants' needs. So also narrative inquiry approach, which I've used in various ways. So this is all about my methodology, about my participants, and the volunteer group that ran the book club. And again, I was the participant observer. I gathered all kinds of data, and what we're looking at here is we're looking at narrative as a methodology and as a theory, and in the idea that we're trying to listen to the stories or the narratives that the kids tell and see how they're positioning themselves. We're also looking at the racial component of their speech because of the topics, and because out of the 28 children, only 2 were white. And a lot of the discussion focused on racial, gendered, and cultural issues. So I looked specifically at their language around those topics. And then I used narrative inquiry to craft the narratives of the focal students. But to get to the actual making of the narratives, it took me a lot of work. This is about my data collection. And I see that I'm already at 6 minutes. So I'm going to whip through this. This is my demographic data. And there's nothing in my literature section right now, but I do have literature, and I'm working on my literature review. The gap in the literature is around, there's a lot of literature on students using young adult books to explore social justice issues, but not necessarily that extra step to how does it help them engage in civic action. There's also, obviously, we all know, a lot of literature on narrative inquiry that I'm using, and so that's still coming. Data collection, right there, the majority of, that's from my chart. So a data log was kept, interviews were transcribed. So my initial data reduction was looking at the attendance records and focusing on the students that I had the most interview data with and who had participated the most. And actually 2 of my 3 participants never missed a session. So using that data and looking at those students, I ended up identifying 3 focal students, and their names in my study, which are pseudonyms, are Ali, Damien, and Colby. So first I looked at their views in their interviews, and I did a structural coding. So this coding was kind of chunked it in 3 categories based on my research questions, looking at the kids as in their language as they're exploring perspectives. The second one was the importance of contemporary literature versus literature they use in school. And the third was the perceived need for dialogue, that the kids wanted to talk about these issues. So then I took those codes to a team of graduate students, and they helped me look at some other categories, such as the word relevancy came up a lot, identity, and adolescent empowerment, which is also part of civic engagement. So then what I did was I went through all the data. I went through each of the videos and sort of gathered the chunks of conversation and transcribed those around my focal participants. So that was kind of embedded data. And then I made a data map that showed where each of these conversations was and when it occurred and what was the discussion centered around, in order to gather as much data on each participant as possible. So then for each student, I created charts, and I call these my vignette charts. And I have an example on the next slide, but I use these and I analyzed with critical discourse analysis focused on racial discussion, as well as gender and culture. And I tagged it all in Microsoft Word to try to tease out those conversations as well. So this is an example, just a small example of Colby's samples from interviews, from small group conversations. So some of them you can see are transcripts, some of them are chunks of her talking. So then once I had gathered that individual, those vignettes, then I analyzed them using positioning theory to try to write the narrative. So I wrote the narratives, then I went back and looked and checked their surveys and looked at the information that they gave in writing about when talking about text. And then I emailed them to the participants. So I emailed them last week, and I'm waiting. I have not received any feedback from the kids yet. I'm really hoping that I get some from them, but at least I feel as though I've shared the narrative. It would be great if I get something back from them. So I have some preliminary findings, which I don't really want to talk about yet, but I do want to talk about this idea that using different analysis tools has been really tricky. And obviously this is a much bigger project than for this class, right? So for this class, learning about narrative inquiry and using narrative to write my findings has been really helpful, because I feel as though, especially from a humanistic teacher point of view, I want those participants' words and their voices to shine through, because we know that teens don't necessarily get the respect that they deserve, because they're so amazing and they can teach us a lot. As a matter of fact, 2 of the participants talked repeatedly about something I didn't know, called adultism, which is the idea that adults believe they know more than children, and therefore what they have to say trumps whatever. Oh, I'm sorry, I used that word. Trumps whatever a child says, regardless of how that might affect the child. So the teenagers taught me a new term, but some of the findings are specific to individual participants. And right now I'm looking across the findings to write my discussion. And so far I have this active intertextual positioning that the students do as they're talking about the video and the stories from the novels, and interfusing them with their own experiences. And then I also was able to find and flesh out a second order story like Van Dyke talks about, where one of the students positions himself in one way, but when you look at the underlying story, it has another perspective that he doesn't necessarily always show. And so I'm not sure if that underlying perspective, which was sort of a bootstraps, all you have to do is work hard to get through life idea, if that was for my benefit as an old white lady interviewing him. So I'm sharing as much as I can at this point. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm so disjointed, but I feel really bad that I was late on this and I didn't actually finish my PowerPoint. But the paper is coming along, and I'm really excited about how the student narratives fit into my research. And I'm also able to see lots of other ways and other students to write about as I'm digging so deeply in here. So thanks. I hope everybody has a great break. I'm sorry I'm late. I hope you get a chance to see it. And I really appreciated this class. Okay, thanks. Bye.